then connect with your friends to kind of get around the official investigation and move forward. Seems like the long way around, though.
And what do you propose that she does? She just comes out and says, I'm dying?
I don't know if she is dying. I'm assuming that if it was minor, she would come out and just say, oh, yeah, I got a case of allergies, I'm taking some Claritin, and I'm good.
Prediction time.
Oh, Russ Gallo's about to go on record.
Somebody write this down.
Oh, no, you're going to write it down when you go to goonrecord.com.
In the next 8 years, and I'll let you do that plug in a second, in the 8 years, which is if a president gets lucky and gets reelected, within the next 8 years, both Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders will no longer be with us. Prediction.
All right, Russ Gallo is about to go on record with his prediction.
They're both should be put out to pasture, and it looks like they're on the sunset of their careers.
You know what? I was going to do the goonrecord.com plug here, but I'm going to let the commercials do that. When we come back, folks, we're going to have David Keene, the opinion editor of the Washington Times, coming on to talk about his new book, Shall Not Be Infringed, talking about the history of fighting for the Second Amendment. And we're going to be talking some presidential politics as well. Gene and Russ, behind enemy lines, listen to the goonrecord.com ad that you're going to hear right now. If you're a long-time listener of the show, or maybe this is your first time listening, you can probably tell that me and the gang here, we like to have our share of fun, whether it's on or off the air. We talk about 2-drink minimum radio and no medication Wednesdays or whatever day it may be. That's why when we found the people at Less Government, More Fun, we knew it was a match made in heaven with this show. Folks, we live in a time where government is out of hand. Our founding fathers did not intend government to be all-consuming in all parts of our lives. That's why we are telling you to go to lessgovmorefun.com, check out the website, check out the swag. What the people want is less government, more fun. Pass it on, make it happen.
Who might you save?
Your mother, your father, your husband, uncle, aunt, son.
Learn FAST, F-A-S-T, the sudden signs of a stroke, and you could save.
Your friend, teacher, boss.
F, face drooping. A, arm weakness. S, speech difficulty. T, time to call 911. F-A-S-T. That's F, face drooping. A, arm weakness. S, speech difficulty. T, time to call 911. The sooner they get to the hospital, the sooner they'll get treatment. And that can make a remarkable difference in the recovery of
your neighbor, the waiter, grandmother, grandfather.
So learn FAST, the sudden signs of a stroke, then pass it on, because you never know who might save you.
Your wife, your colleague.
Spot a stroke fast. Visit strokeassociation.org, brought to you by the American Stroke Association and the Ad Council.
Behind Enemy Lines Radio is all about being right. No, seriously, it is. If you ever listen to Russ Gallo or me go back and forth on some issue, we always want to make sure that we remember who said what and when we said it. That's why we go to goonrecord.com. It's a brand new social media website. Challenge people on what they believe, whether it's in politics, sports, entertainment, finance, whatever. There's a category for you at goonrecord.com. Check it out right now. Tell us, what do you stand for? It's time for you to go on record. Behind Enemy Lines. Back on the air. Gene Baradelli back behind Enemy Lines, and joining me on the line right now, it is an honor to welcome back to the show probably the one person most responsible for the show being in existence. I tell everybody that David Keene is the reason why the show is on the map, thanks to the interviews he does for us. David, thank you for coming back on the show.
Well, it's a pleasure always to come back.
So, congratulations on this amazing new book that is coming out in October, Shall Not Be Infringed, The New Assaults on Your Second Amendment. Tell us, what made you decide to write this book?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. First of all, in the last year, President Obama has doubled down on his opposition to firearms freedom through executive orders, through reinterpretation of existing regulations and the like. And secondly, for the first time in more than a decade, the question of whether, in fact, the Second Amendment should be allowed to continue to exist as it is, or whether a future Supreme Court might abolish it or gut it, is on the table and is important this year as the elections approach.
It's scary to think that gutting the Second Amendment and changing it as we know it is on the table.
That's exactly right.
And believe what you're referring to is Hillary Clinton's statements of how past Supreme Court decisions on the Second Amendment were, quote unquote, wrong. This is a first for a presidential candidate, right?
It is, and it's like everything a Clinton says, her language has to be parsed very carefully. Because she said, well, I don't want to abolish the Second Amendment. No, she doesn't necessarily want to have it erased from the Bill of Rights. She just wants the Supreme Court to reinterpret it so it's meaningless. The Supreme Court, in the decision you're referring to, the Heller decision in 2008, finally said that Americans have an individual right to own a firearm for self-protective purposes in their home. Mrs. Clinton said, along with the people who argued against that position, that there is no such thing as an individual right for Americans to own a firearm, and that she thought it was wrongly decided. If that decision were reversed, the constitutional right to own a firearm as a private individual would vanish. She'd still have to, as president, go to Congress and do other things to try and get rid of it, but the presumption that Americans have such a right would be stricken from the books, regardless of whether the language was erased from the Bill of Rights or not.
It's a scary proposition. And, of course, this is probably, at least for me, the one reason why I'm compelled to vote for Donald Trump, because the alternative of what happens on the Supreme Court if a Clinton administration comes into existence is, I don't even want to think about it.
Right, it's not just firearms rights. It's the First Amendment. It's the Fourth Amendment. The so-called progressives that now dominate the Democratic Party, a Democratic Party which has moved far to the left since her husband was president, would change the Constitution not just to abolish firearms ownership, but to restrict speech, to restrict the right to practice religion, and do many of the other things that Americans, since the founding of the Republic, have felt they had a right to do. So this really is an election. People talk about how this election is important or that election is important. This one is important because if the Supreme Court is changed in the way that Hillary Clinton would change it, by appointing a progressive liberal to the court, and perhaps as many as 2 or 3 because of the age of some of the justices, we're talking about altering the Constitution for at least a generation. And history tells us that once you give up rights, you rarely get them back.
David, talk a little bit about your co-author on this book, Thomas Mason, who brings more of an international perspective into the collaboration that you guys have created. Because it's interesting to me because that's usually what Democrats do. It's usually out of the Democratic playbook, out of the liberal playbook, to use international viewpoints as a way to shame America, to make Americans feel like they do things better over there. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, there are 2 reasons why the international perspective is so important, and Tom has followed firearms negotiations and international treaties and the like for more than 15 years. The 2 reasons are, first of all, exactly what you mentioned. The Supreme Court today, with people like Stephen Breyer on the court, believe that we as a country and the Supreme Court of our country should not just be cognizant of, but should give weight to the opinions of other countries and courts in other countries and to treaties whether or not we've signed them. And so the arms trade treaty that the Obama administration signed, well, it hasn't even been sent to Congress because they know the Senate will not ratify it, is already beginning to be used as an argument by the administration for taking steps to restrict firearms in ways that they would not otherwise be able to do. Secondly, and this has gone on for a couple of decades, the anti-gun movement in this country has failed in Congress time and again. It's failed in most states other than in some one-party states where it's been able to push its agenda rather effectively. And it's failed in the courts, witness the Heller decision in 2008. So some years ago they began to shift to the international arena, thinking perhaps there are things that we can accomplish through the Supreme Court's deference to foreign laws on the one hand and the President's treaty ability on the other that will allow us to go around Congress and the people to get some of the restrictions that we can't get either in the legal or political forums in the United States. And that's what this is all about, and that's why it's so important.
And the book also addresses the battlefront at home, which may be in the courts in the future, but it is really in the court of public opinion. Talk about how you've seen polls and studies and numbers get twisted and turned around by the left.
Well, maybe the if it weren't so tragic, the most humorous thing was that in the post Sandy Hook period, Mayor Bloomberg's people and one of his groups did a bus tour of the United States, and on the side of the bus they listed the people who had died from gun violence. Now, of course, 2/3 of those people are people who committed suicide, but they also include everyone killed in confrontations with the police, and most outrageously and famously, the people who bombed the Boston Marathon, because one of them, of course, died as the result of police gunfire. They stopped at one town, and somebody recognized the name, and all heck broke loose, and finally they had to apologize and pull it off. But they've used polls that purportedly say a certain percentage of NRA members support them on this. The NRA doesn't release its list of membership, so there's really no way for them to even get the universe from which they purport to draw their sample. Polls are really interesting because you can influence the outcome by the way you ask the question. And most of the polls that you see in the public arena on gun questions are polls that have been commissioned by groups, for example, former Mayor Bloomberg's group, that are set up to make a point and to come up with a finding that they predetermined before they even ask the questions. So you have to ask yourself, who's doing this, why, and what is it that they're going to accomplish? There is an example that in the public relations field, they have managed, or they argue, that the nation, as they put it, is awash in blood. That the increase in the number of firearms available to the public has resulted in massive increases in homicide and the like. In the last couple of decades, the number of homicides in this country, even with the breakdown because of failed policies in some of our major cities, even with that breakdown, the homicide rate has been cut in half at the same time that gun ownership has increased by 2.5 times. So if their logic was right, you would expect the streets to be flowing in blood, but they're not, because there's no causal relationship between gun ownership in the hands of citizens to defend themselves, to hunt, to engage in sporting, shooting, and the like, and the crime rate. The crime rate is not gun violence, it's gun crime. And we know how to deal with that, but they don't want to. What they want to do, because to them, the mere existence of firearms is somehow offensive, they want to go after honest citizens that own firearms rather than the criminals who steal them, buy them on the black market, and misuse them.
Last question before we let you go. Donald Trump got into some hot water with the media, who I think is complicit in this narrative that you were just talking about, especially when you think like Katie Couric's documentary, quote unquote, where they selectively edit responses from pro-gun advocates. Donald Trump is the messenger right now. He got into a little trouble when he talked about NRA voters earlier in the cycle. Are you concerned at all that the message will be lost with this messenger at the head of the movement? I
don't think so, because first of all, the response to what he said revealed more about the people interpreting as they did than about what he said. What he said was that even if the Supreme Court, even if she appoints people to the Supreme Court, the NRA knows how to handle these things. And so people that were A, anti-Trump, and B, anti-gun, and C, think that all gun owners are crazy lunatics, said he's urging them to kill Hillary Clinton. No, he was saying that the NRA has fought these battles. We fight them in the courts. We fight them in the legislatures, in the states, in the Congress, and internationally, and we've won a lot more of them than we've lost. And that's the same thing that you or I might say, because if she manages to appoint somebody like this to the Supreme Court, and they make it legal for Congress to say ban gun ownership in the extreme, Congress still has to pass that. And we know how to fight that kind of thing on the policy grounds as well as on the constitutional grounds. So,